Where is Rupert Ross-Eckhart today?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, excuse me, I wonder if this is relevant, really. I wonder, perhaps you could ask him at the end, but can we have questions about the role and the...
I think it's a fair question. I think it's a fair question. I'm happy to answer it. So my understanding is that because he currently works for BT, looking at all of their security work, they do work for the police and all sorts of others. My understanding, I don't know the details for fairly obvious reasons, is that there was a particular security issue that needed to be dealt with today. I don't know the details, and you can possibly see why.
I think that the police service is always saying that it's trying to recruit from a wider base. I don't think that works very well. Currently Cambridgeshire, which should be a pretty liberal sort of organisation, doesn't do very well in that regard. I think it's 2% of its police service is not traditionally white. I can say that myself. I've got a background in helping non-traditional employees. In the fire service, I've got an international roaming commission. I work in a number of fire services to encourage the employment of women in fire services. Wow. And I've spent 12, 14 years doing that. And it's an enormously resistant organisation, the fire service. It's not so bad in the police, it's about 25%. But I don't know about what they're actually doing right now, because there's nothing shown. What we will be doing, if I get commissioner's job, is looking at it, because 29% of the population of Peterborough is not white. You know, and yet the police service there isn't white. And from my visits, I visited over 35 locations within our county and within Peterborough, because that is also part of the police service. And from visiting people, this is a major concern. Peterborough is the area where there is most crime, and Peterborough is the area that needs to take more police resources, and quite obviously that happens. But if the police service that is working there doesn't represent its community, you start off at an enormous disadvantage. We know about the disadvantages of race and policing, the problems that are occurring within that and have continued to occur, that were highlighted by Stephen Lawrence and have gone on and have not been particularly solved. So I don't know what it is currently, but I tell you it'll be different when I
I think the technical answer is that people are completely unrepresented as officers. I think the translation service is an interesting one. There's a huge amount of money spent on translation services. There's 100 languages now spoken in Peterborough. It's a huge burden. There's an interesting debate going on about whether people should learn English in an English-speaking country, or whether they should we should provide translation services. The police is unique, in fact, because individuals need to know their rights. So they're almost bound to provide accurate translation services. It's an interesting subject, of course it is, but it sort of moved away from the key problem we've got at the moment, is just not enough officers of any sort available for all of us.
Yeah, if one can't be understood, then there's probably never as many policemen as you, or as many police officers as you like.
Yes, I don't disagree with that at all, but what I'm trying to say is we need to think about this debate in the wider context of that there just aren't the officers out there at the moment to be speaking, or whatever nationality.
Okay.
There's 8% less since 2010. You talk to any community at the moment and they just don't see a police officer from one day to the next, and that's not the officer's fault, it's just the way the system is now. There's a complete lack of funding within the system. So, my first priority, as far as I'm concerned, actually, is to get more money so we have more officers across the county. And of course, I don't believe in positive discrimination. I think what we need to have is a fair balance and entice people. The reality is, we have special constables and PCSOs, and they're actually used as a recruiting base for the constabulary. And any good ones that are coming through, they get snapped up straight away if there's a vacancy. But currently there's been, say, a reduction in numbers, which is not helpful.
Thank you very much. That's a really good question. A really good question. I chatted to a chap in Peterborough who was Polish. He must have been about 7'2", so I was looking up at him like that. He was a police officer in Poland, and he was desperate to become a police officer here. It would absolutely make sense that with the biggest community by far in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough now being Polish, that we have more Polish-speaking officers for the very reasons which was pointed out in terms of the having to bring interpreters in, not just when someone's arrested, but actually for victims, from the victim's point of view as well, which actually people keep forgetting is the most important thing here. One of the biggest stumbling blocks, and I was unaware of this, was the fact that the College of Policing insists on a certain level of English for you to be there. So, and yet the standard of Polish that is required is a lot less. So although his third language is English, because he speaks fluent French and Polish obviously, English is his third language, from the College of Policing's point of view, then his standard of English would have to be a whole lot better. And I think there is a real case to go to the Foreign Secretary to say, look, this doesn't make sense. This is costing a huge amount of money to the police force. It makes absolute sense to have more community policing that are more aligned with some of these communities, and actually to tweak what the College of Policing needs in order to deliver that aspiration. It's a great point, and it was one that I had no idea of until I was talking to this chap in Peterborough last week.
I think it's a really interesting question. I'll resist the urge to comment on some things we've heard earlier, but I think ultimately it comes down to the model that we have in Britain, which is fantastic, this idea of policing by consent. The idea that the police are not part of the state doing things to us, but they're sort of part of us. Or at least that's the idea. It doesn't always work. If you look at some of the footage from South Yorkshire, where you can see sort of very, very different colours of different groups, that the police don't look like the people they're interacting with, that's where you get problems. And we're seeing that in a number of forces around the country. I don't think anywhere is good enough. If you look at senior chief constables, there's not enough women, there's not enough ethnic minorities. I was on the Home Affairs Select Committee at one point, I could tell you exactly how many, and I'm afraid I can't remember now. If we're going to have the police essentially as part of the community working with us to keep us safe, they have to look like the community. And it doesn't work if they look completely different. And that's partly to do with language, but it's also just to do with ways of life, with how comfortable people feel. If you have an all-white force and you're Bangladeshi, say, do you trust the police? You might not do. You start to feel that they're a different set of people. And that starts you down the route which we see in the US and in other places, where you have a police force that interacts much, much worse. I think it's so important, if we're going to have neighbourhood policing, community policing, that we feel that police officers are part of our community. So you want to have people from all the different backgrounds. Languages are a huge problem, and it's really essential that the police do have the ability to communicate in any language with somebody, because one can talk as much as you like about whether people who've lived here for 30 years should learn to speak English. It's a great nationalist rallying cry. But if somebody's coming to visit, we probably want to protect them as well. And if they're coming and then committing a crime, we want to be able to deal with that as well. So we'll always have a translation process. So to me, the key thing is, how do we make sure that the police feel like us? And the police do understand. There was a really interesting campaign, I don't know if you saw it, from the police trying to say that to parents, please don't say that if your children behave badly, you'll go and get the police on them. We want them to come to us when they want help, not to be scared of us. I think there have been changes in policing over a number of years, with more and more armed police, with tasers, with more sort of body jackets, that makes it feel more like they're a force that do things to us. That's not what they should be.
Sure, let me just deal with that last point first, if I may. I don't think we have sufficient resources to go back to the policing that we probably all want, where we see a policeman every street corner. What I would be seeking to do would be to create zero tolerance teams, to descend upon communities, a number of officers, hopefully with some council officials as well, descend upon a community on a random basis, and look at all the low-level crime, the antisocial behaviour, the illegal parking on pavements, the speeding, the drug dealing, that people get so frustrated with, so that people are reassured that the police are around, but also there's a reasonable chance that at some point those that do harm will get caught. At the moment there's pretty much a zero chance of them getting caught. So that's the first point. The second point about serious crime. The government has got a bit of a schizophrenic view on life at the moment. On one hand, we've heard about the push for devolution with Norfolk and Suffolk. In tandem with that, the Home Secretary has been pressing Cambridgeshire to have a formal collaboration with Herts and Bedfordshire, which is embarked on. So you can see this county is having to look both ways, and then if you sort of superimpose the potential for the fire service to come in with the police as well, and you've got a third dynamic there. Serious crime is now looked after across by Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire collectively. It's more complicated than that actually, because all the forces then that exist around those also collaborate, which you'd expect, because criminals don't actually know boundaries. And that particular collaboration, I believe, is giving them critical mass in order to deal with serious crime. Where I have some real concerns is that same collaboration is also collaborating on dogs, on armed police response vehicles, and on road policing. And I'm afraid the pull of the M1, the A1, and Luton is taking resources out of Cambridgeshire across to Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire inappropriately. And as the Police and Crime Commissioner, I will pull back from some of these collaborations, and we should collaborate on a case-by-case basis where it makes sense, not as an end in its own right. Because I chaired local government shared services for Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire, which is expanded to include Milton Keynes and Norwich and elsewhere. And initially we made savings, mainly on IT licensing. After that it became an organisation of its own right, with its own managing director. Savings started to get less, and actually the output, the quality for the two key partners, which was Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire, reduced. So, because it became, LGSS became something of its own in its own right. Everything you did to collaborate was good, and that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. It must be on a case-by-case basis. Sorry, a bit of a long answer, but...
No, well, that's good. You just managed it. Jason, would you like to go next?
Thank you very much. It's about creating resilience, ultimately, within our police force. You don't have community policing at the moment because the budgets have been reduced. Now, we can go to government kicking and screaming, but we've got what we've got. The key to basically, in order to deliver a good service and improve on the service we already have, is to get smarter about what we do. And you get smarter about what we do, which creates more resilience, by doing simple things. You've got Hinchinbrook, and I'm talking about the wider opportunities with the fire service now as well. You've got Hinchinbrook, where you've got two headquarters next to each other. Why? You have a fire station and a police station next to each other quite often, where actually people just want a point of contact. It doesn't matter whether it's in a fire station, whether it's in a police station. If you create that environment, and believe you me, regardless of wearing a blue badge, I will be hammering on the door of the government for a fairer deal for Cambridgeshire in any case. But we also have to be practical, that the government has set a direction in order to reduce the deficit that it inherited some years ago from the Labour government. Now, I think that it's a reality. It's a reality of life. It might be last year's story, but again,
done well with growth, haven't you?
Pardon?
Done well with growth, haven't you?
Growth is better than it was. But anyway, but we'll stick to it. We'll stick to it. The whole point of serious crime is it is just that. And if you deal with serious crime, especially drug-related crime, you quite often clear up a lot of the other pettier crimes around town. I've been told that there is open drug dealing on some roads in Cambridge. That is utterly disgraceful, and that should be dealt with. That was in Mill Road when we were talking to business owners.
You only just found this out?
Yeah.
How can you stand there and say things like that so you gain no credibility?
The point being that when it comes to serious crime, we have to deal with it. We have to ensure that when it comes to budgeting, that we put the money in the right place to ensure that we tackle some of this serious stuff. Now, frankly, when it comes to drug dealing, we have to take a really harsh view on that, because we all know that the reality of that, it means that, when you get a burglary in town, when they're going for jewellery, when they're going for cash, frankly, that quite often is drug related. We all know that when they manage to arrest the police one or two individuals, it clears up a whole area because it is the same people doing this. We have to be targeted with the money that we have. And if I am successful next Thursday, that is exactly what I will go out and do.
Thank you. Dave.
Oh, okay.
Is it?
No, it's okay. I I think it's an interesting question, and I'm aware that there is no more money. The Conservative Party have taken the money away. So I can't say to you, like a politician might, well, I'll give you a lot more police officers because I'm going to knock on the door at number 10, or I'm going to raise the precept, because I can't do that. And I can only be what I am. What you see with me is what you get, is honest. Now, what I can promise you is efficiency, but not efficiency through cutting jobs, not efficiency through doing away with backroom jobs, which means that frontline police officers have to start doing backroom jobs and spend half their time in the police station rather than them helping us. What I can promise you is that I will get down, take off my jacket, roll up my sleeves and meet with the communities. And I'm going to bring police officers to that. And as I've said this already, I really mean that. And by doing that, I'm going to make the police service more efficient. I'm going to raise morale in the police. I am a cultural expert. That was what my PhD was on. I understand that police morale is low. I understand that police sickness is high. So you increase efficiency by reducing sickness and increasing the police officer's desire to come to work and to do that work. And so by working with the communities, by encouraging police-community relationships, I will improve policing. The idea of having a hit squad, as Nick says, that sounds good, doesn't it? I think that's a bit of a politician's answer, because it's like playing to the gallery. The reality is that when people have tried hit squads, what they turn into is the sort of SPG that Metropolitan Police Service produced, and it doesn't work like that. They become elite groups within the police service, and they don't do what they're sent out to do. In regards to your point about serious crime and the allocation of resources, well, to an extent, I will be led by the Chief Constable. To an extent. I need to sit down with the Chief Constable and decide what is a priority. Now, I know what my priority is. It's low-level crime. My priority is about helping the masses, the large numbers of people that suffer from antisocial behaviour, bad car parking, difficult cycling, all the things that people talk to me about. So, big crime, of course, it's a priority. Somebody gets murdered, resources get put in that direction. But to me, it's low-level crime, it's increasing efficiency through engagement with the public and getting the public to pass that information that they have. Because you can rest assured that nearly every crime that occurs, somebody knows about. Now, if people know that people will be passing information to the police, they're going to be less likely to commit crimes. So, in a broad scope, I think there is efficiency to be made. I can't promise you more police officers. I'm going to produce from my budget savings in the Commissioner's office. I'm going to produce 3 constables. Yeah, just finish. Okay. One in Cambridge, one in Huntingdon, and one in Peterborough. Their sole job will be to walk the streets of those 3 cities and talk to people.
Chairman, before you go, can I just correct a point of fact, if I may?
I'm not a chairman, by the
Well, I'll
way.
call you a chairman if I don't. By the way.
Should be a chairwoman.
And if you do mind, then
I'm very grateful for Dave. He keeps saying I'm a career politician. I was actually in politics for 4 years. That's all it was. I just happened to have made a very big impact when I was in politics.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Chair. We're running a bit short of time, but I think it was a really interesting question. And I'll come back to it in a moment. But I just want to pick up this idea, because we've had some interesting visions here, and I'm a bit chilled by quite a lot of the different visions that we've seen so far. In fact, all 3 of them I have comments about. I thought the most interesting phrase, I think it was yours, Nick, was when you were talking about how these zero-tolerance squads would descend on a community. Now, I was talking earlier about why we want policing by consent, and we want engagement with the community, and that is exactly the idea that police descend on the community. It's a state doing things to people. That runs completely against how policing in this country has been done.
It does in the city of Cambridge, but not
really,
in the rest of the county.
And it's really, really worrying. I don't want the sense to be that the police are something which descends on you. That's not how we reduce crime. I thought your question was really interesting from your experience. I'd love to talk more about what you're actually doing there. And that constant tension about the big cases, how do you make sure they get the funding? How do murder cases, big rape cases, all of those actually get continued work? There's been discussion again in South Yorkshire about how much money was spent on Hillsborough. Well, frankly, good. I mean, I wish it hadn't done because the disaster should never have happened. But you have to make sure there's money available there. And there is some national support for really big, rare things that happen. Otherwise, you pool it at a force level. You have to make sure that happened. But I think the really interesting bit was when you were talking about how there's that pressure to get the numbers right. And I think that is one of the problems. I spoke earlier about the wonderful Nick Percival and some of the brilliant stuff that he did, but the fact he didn't arrest enough people. And that is a problem in the police and in lots of other organisations. We've seen cases where one of the easiest things to deal with is drug use. If you find somebody with a spliff, you can arrest them. It doesn't take you very long. Much, much faster than actually dealing with a murder or a rape or domestic violence case. And so we've seen cases where police officers have been encouraged to deal with that rather than dealing what I would see as much worse criminal behaviour. And that to me is completely wrong, and that's been driven by those central targets. I would not go that way, and I know Rupert would not go that way. If you talk to more and more police constables, chief constables, even a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner, you can spare resources by not dealing with things like people who are smoking a spliff. Yes, tackle the burglaries. Absolutely tackle those. But we spent 40 years saying if you have some marijuana, you can get 7 years in jail, and we still have millions of people having it. I'd rather have the police officers spending their time dealing with other crimes that hurt people more, and treat that as a medical problem. Let's help people get out of their addictions. I think that would be a really good way to go. The other way of getting more resource is to focus on reducing the crimes in that first place. It doesn't get you more people, it just gets them doing more things. Technology also helps. The fire service have really learnt this. The job of the fire service, day in, day out, is mostly not putting out fires, because they learned it is much, much more effective to stop the fires happening in the first place. Police could learn a lot from them. They're different services, but that has to be the right approach. You put the fire out if you have to, but you try to avoid the fire, solve the crime if you have to, but stop the crime first.
The Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, to my view, is actually quite large at the moment for the job it does. I have experience and I have a good background in reducing overall costs and especially reducing central costs of offices especially. Now, when it comes to the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, you need enough staff to be effective around you, but that's all you need. You don't need people that are just filling out paper, that they're policy driven. I agree with the point that was made earlier on. You don't need duplication either, because the police force has its own staff in many other respects. At the moment, the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner is in Camborne. The headquarters is in Hinchinbrook. When I became leader of my council, that was a similar, although it wasn't demographically in different places, it was very similar in terms of the leader was in one building, the chief executive was in another. The first role I took on was actually moving next door to the chief officer, because I think that relationship between the chief officer, in this case the chief constable, and the police and crime commissioner is absolutely imperative. That's the most important relationship of all, and it has to be one built on trust and professionalism, and also one that the chief constable can expect challenge under that as well, because that's very much a part of this role. I think the overall cost does need to come down, because every penny that you save, again in the back office, wherever that is, whether it's the main police, policing back office with HR, with collaboration with ICT, everyone's doing computers in a different way in some departments, that needs to be looked at. Every bit of saving then is ploughed straight on the front line, and we get back to this community policing that everybody wants. So in terms of the overall reduction, yes, that would be the case. Would I move from Camborne? Yes, absolutely. And I'd move the office into the police headquarters at Hinchinbrook.
Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, thanks. I agree. I think it was a mistake putting the Police and Crime Commission office in Camborne. I think it was well motivated. It cost £28,000 a year, circulating money from one authority to another, a complete waste of money. Look, the police is one of the most over-regulated organisations actually that exist in local authorities. You've got a chief constable, a deputy chief constable, assistant chief constable, a chief financial officer, a media director, the Police and Crime Commissioner, Police and Crime Commissioner's deputy, a chief executive for the Police and Crime Commissioner, and you've got a PR director as well. Completely unnecessary. In my case, I'm not going to have a deputy. I think that's a waste of money. The chief executive needs to look to her laurels, because I reduced the chief execs of the county council's salary, and I'll be seeking to do the same for her. And I think the PR roles need to be reduced considerably. So it's a bit of a mess there. It's a bit of an empire that's grown from 6 people to 17. It's just completely unnecessary. I'm going to hark back a little bit to a question that was raised before. I don't have the same negative view on getting fair funding for Cambridgeshire's police. You know, I led the charge at leading the county council for school funding. Others have picked up on it and helped by local MPs. But that's an important issue, and you can really make a big difference. Not only that, I had an interesting half an hour with Eric Pickles in the back of his Jag at Northstowe. I was so glad it was a Jag and not
Can I just say, I'm not going to do that.
What I was going to say, I was just very grateful it was a Jag and not a Mini, to be fair. But we talked about the consequences of council tax and investments and Northstowe and the A14 widening and the superfast broadband projects and the station in Cambridge and the Ely Southern bypass, all the things that I was bringing forward there, and how you need to do that. And you know, at an LGA conference, despite him not wishing to see council tax rises, he said the only county council leader in the country who has justified a council tax rise is Nick Larkin, who's still over there, much to my embarrassment. So it is very possible to have an impact, and to do that you need a reasonable team. You don't need 17. I don't think it'll go back to 6. My guess will be somewhere in the middle. But it's important. In terms of the trust, this is a much more important one. By default, I would have changed the culture of the police to openness. So all the papers, for example, by default should be published on websites to save FOI requests. We should volunteer at the filming by default at meetings. Meetings should be held in public. The police still have a culture, and they did when I was on the police authority, of having meetings hidden away. Even if you want to go and see one of the public meetings now at the police headquarters, for example, you can't get in unless you've got some ID to prove who you are. Those are real barriers to people just turning up. And at the county council, we opened this lot up hugely, and it made a big difference. And I think that will help with trust.
Thank you. Dave.
Okay. Commissioner's office. Now, I'm not going to promise that I'm just going to cut jobs because I want to cut jobs. I will look at what the Commissioner's office is currently doing, see if there's any ideas that and the way it can be improved, look for places there where we can make savings. But I'm not just going to guarantee that the 17 people are inefficient. I'm not going to say that those people are unwanted. I will look at that and identify if there needs to be cuts in that area. I think it's important for the Commissioner not to come in and start pushing things about like that. The police service is a huge body. It's like an ocean-going liner, actually. If you're going to change direction, if you're going to move it, you need to do that in a considered fashion. So I'm an academic as well as being a very practical firefighter and fire officer. So I'm going to look and see how the organisation works. I will, of course, be moving to Hinchinbrook because it makes absolutely no sense to be at Camborne, because there's a floor at Hinchinbrook that's still empty that was laid down for the Commissioner who chose not to go there. I also argue in response to mobility is that I have a laptop, and most of us have a laptop, and I don't necessarily think that I'm going to be stuck in Hinchinbrook doing my job. My job's going to be out there meeting police officers, meeting the public, trying to improve morale, trying to improve public liaison, trying to get people working together. And through that, you get the trust. Now, the lack of trust that you speak of in the police service, it isn't that lack of trust of corruption that we used to experience in the 1960s. It's a lack of trust that they can actually help you. Because people don't even bother to report crime. Domestic violence doesn't get reported. Petty theft doesn't get reported. Incidents on the street don't get reported because people don't trust that the police can do that work. They think they're too busy. So, no wonderful offers. I'm going to make as many savings as I can. There will be, I don't agree with Nick, I don't see how you can't have a deputy. I've appointed my deputy as far as I can go. I've made it very clear who my deputy will be. It's Ansar Ali from Peterborough. He has a lot of experience of police work. He is in the ballot box with me, if you like, because it is an appointment that I'm able to make. So I don't see how you can't have a deputy. What happens if you break your leg? What happens if you have to go in hospital for an operation on your eye?
You would not the other 8 people I just mentioned. They're quite capable. Chief constables are actually very effective people.
This is a organisation that needs to be led by strong leadership, concerned leadership, considered leadership, and one that remembers policing is by consent, and policing is done by citizens in uniform, not by an armed service that is on our streets and taking over.
Thank you.
So I haven't spoken to Rupert about the exact details of all of this. I'm sure there are some savings that can be made. The case for moving to Hinchingbrook and saving money there seems pretty strong. In terms of a deputy, I think I did ask Rupert about that, and the view is to find out, once you're in the job, what is actually needed. Do you need a deputy to be paid $30,000 a year because there's a real job? Do you need somebody who is on standby in the event that you break your leg? In which case you probably don't have to pay them 30 grand a year, you pay them if they're actually needed at some point. And it goes back to the idea of, let's find out what's going on, and let's see how things develop and what you actually need, rather than coming up with convenient political promises at the beginning. The one other thing, by the way, well, actually two other things I'll say, to fill in the 3 minutes. One is, you can, I won't take all of it, don't worry. Because I was going to talk about savings. You can have ongoing savings. So I'm now working in the NHS in the clinical commissioning group here, and we have every year to reduce the amount of money we spend on administration. That's been a really good discipline. We've managed it fairly comfortably. That's something that you could do within the police as well. You don't slash it to nothing, because you do need some support. You can have that pressure, taking money out of there so you can spend it on something that you need in the front line. So that's I think, one thing. The other thing is to say, again, on the idea of efficiency and actually getting police to do things better, people have slightly touched on the idea of using technology, but it hasn't really been a major feature. I remember going out a couple of years ago with the police on a shift, and they come back from a domestic violence incident, had a little sort of shoulder-mounted camera to record what happened. And because the technology wasn't very good, it took about 3 hours to download the video. And that tied up 2 officers, 1 special, and I was just hanging around watching, for all of that time when we could have been doing something more useful. If you can update that technology, not to get police off the streets, I don't want police just sat behind screens, never talking to anybody, but so that they don't have to waste time filling in forms again and again, spending hours finding cables to connect things, that will make it all much better. And a police and crime commissioner who's any good would be doing a lot of that technology themselves and would be able to move around, able to work wherever it is. And again, I know Rupert is exactly the sort of person who works on that sort of thing and loves to work that way.
And his Home Secretary, I believe, has provision to do that.
Yeah.
Yes. But the whole point of the post as created was that they were independent and only accountable to the electorate.
Yeah, I actually was involved with negotiating, trying to change bits of the legislation. So the idea is they are elected in the same way that it's hard to get rid of other elected people. If they commit serious wrongdoing and various other things, you can. But generally, they are the person you get for the next 4 years. So your vote matters. It's also just worth saying, and I'll do this, I think, on behalf of all of us, you get 2 votes. You get a first column vote and a second column vote. So you can vote for the person you'd really like and not lose your vote, even if it turns out that they don't win. So it's just worth saying.
Yeah, I think that needs to be explained a bit more. The second vote only comes into play if your candidate gets knocked out.
Yeah.
So you don't have to put cross for the same party, because that is actually, well, I'm not saying what you should do, but the reality is that the second vote only comes into play if the person that you voted for gets knocked out.
So you have a lot of freedom.
Right, well,